The wind in Red Willow did not just blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of the New Mexico Territory, a relentless sandpaper that stripped paint from wood and hope from men. It was the year 1879, and the town sat on the edge of the world, balancing precariously between the silence of the high desert and the iron roar of the future. The railroad was coming. It was not there yet, but the promise of it hung in the air heavier than the heat. Survey stakes, driven deep into the red earth like splinters, marked the path where the steel rails would soon lie. Land prices were jumping, climbing 10% one week and 20% the next. The town was splitting down the middle like a piece of dry firewood. On one side stood the men who saw the locomotive as a god that would bring whiskey and lumber and coin. On the other stood those who knew that when a beast that size needed to drink, it would drain the wells dry and leave the rest of them dying of thirst. Into this cauldron of dust and greed rode a man who had spent his life trying to be invisible, despite the fact that God had built him to be seen from a mile away. Silas Gray shifted in his saddle. The horse, a sturdy bay with a white blaze, huffed with fatigue. Silas was tired too. His bones ached with the deep, vibrating weariness of a man who had ridden 300 miles on a promise written on lavender-scented paper. He was a courier by trade, a man who carried letters and parcels across the Badlands where stagecoaches feared to roll. It was a lonely life, which suited him fine. When he stood on the ground, Silas measured 6 feet and 7 inches. In a world where the average man barely scraped 5 feet and 6 inches, Silas was a giant. He had spent 30 years stooping through doorways, apologizing for taking up space, and enduring the wide-eyed stares of children and the suspicious glares of men who felt threatened by his shadow. He carried scars. Some were from the war between the states, jagged lines on his ribs where shrapnel had found him. Others were from skirmishes on the border, but the deepest ones were invisible, etched into his pride by a lifetime of being called a freak, a monster, or simply that tall breed. His heritage was mixed, part white settler and part native blood that ran deep and quiet. But his height was the only thing people ever saw. He reached into the breast pocket of his duster coat. The letter was there. He did not need to pull it out to know what it said. He had memorized every loop of the handwriting. Dear Mr. Gray, I am a woman of simple means but distinct tastes, living in the town of Red Willow. I own a small plot of land and a house that feels too large for one soul. I am looking for a husband who is strong, steady, and willing to build a life based on mutual respect and Christian values. I do not care for a man's fortune, only the content of his character. If you are tired of the road, come to me. Yours, Evelyn Kitt. Silas patted the pocket. A home, a wife, a clean slate. He was not a fool. He knew mail-order arrangements were business deals as much as romances. But Evelyn sounded different. She sounded kind. For a man who had slept under the stars for 3,000 nights, the idea of a hearth and a woman who did not look at him with fear was worth riding through hell to find. And hell was trying its best to stop him. The horizon turned a bruised purple as a dust storm began to boil up from the south. Silas pulled his scarf up over his nose. He spurred the bay forward. The town of Red Willow was just ahead, a cluster of brown shapes against the vast emptiness. He was not just riding into a town. He was riding toward the only chance at dignity he had left. High above the town, on a ridge of sandstone that looked like the backbone of a sleeping dragon, Ayanna Redfeather watched the dust cloud approach. She sat perfectly still, her presence blending into the rock and sagebrush so completely that a lizard scurried over the toe of her moccasin without pausing. She was a woman of the land, a scout for her people who lived near the sweet water springs a few miles north. She was not old, perhaps 25 or 26, but her eyes held the ancient, weary knowledge of a grandmother. She adjusted the rifle across her lap. It was a Henry repeating rifle, clean and well-oiled. Ayanna did not trust the treaty papers the government men brought, but she trusted the weight of the steel and the lever action. Below her, Red Willow looked like a scab on the skin of the desert. She saw the new construction, the frames of buildings going up to feed the railroad workers who would arrive in a month. She saw the telegraph poles, a line of dead trees strung together with wire, marching across the sacred emptiness, dissecting the sky. A knife, she whispered to herself. They are opening the belly of the earth. She did not hate all the settlers. Hate was a waste of energy, and water was too scarce to spend on tears or rage. But she understood them better than they understood themselves. She watched the wagons roll in, filled with people chasing a dream that had already been sold to someone else. Her gaze shifted to the lone rider pushing through the rising wind. Even from this distance, the man was enormous. He sat on his horse with a strange, rigid posture, as if he were trying to shrink into himself. Ayana narrowed her eyes. Most men rode into town with their chests puffed out, acting like they owned the ground the moment their boots touched it. This man rode cautiously. He rode like a man who expected a blow and was already flinching. "Another lost soul," she murmured. The wind whipped a strand of black hair across her face. She pushed it back. She had her own battles to fight. The water rights to the springs were being challenged again. A man named Amos Hale had been sending his riders near the tribe's encampment, checking fences that did not exist, testing boundaries. She stood up, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. The storm was coming fast. She needed to get back to her people, but she took one last look at the giant riding into the dust. She wondered what kind of desperation drove a man to Red Willow, a place that was quickly becoming a graveyard for good intentions. Amos Hale stood on the porch of the general store, watching the storm swallow the sun. He was a man of average height but substantial presence, dressed in a suit of gray wool that cost more than most cowboys earned in 3 years. He smoked a cigar, the ash long and gray, held delicately between fingers that had never roped a steer or dug a post hole. Amos dealt in the future. He dealt in cattle. Yes, but mostly he dealt in land and the water required to make that land worth something. "It is going to be a bad one, Mr. Hale," said the storekeep, a nervous man named O'Malley who wiped his hands perpetually on a dirty apron. "It is just dust, O'Malley," Amos said, his voice smooth and dry like old paper. "Dust settles. It always does. The question is, who owns the ground it settles on?" Amos turned his gaze toward the telegraph office across the street. The wires were humming in the wind. That office was the true heart of Red Willow. Information flowed in and out: prices of beef in Chicago, schedules of the Union Pacific, orders from politicians in Washington. Amos made it his business to know what came over those wires before anyone else. "Has the surveyor sent the final map?" Amos asked, not looking at the storekeep. "Not yet, sir. The telegraph operator says the lines are patchy with the storm." Amos tapped ash onto the boardwalk. "Tell him I want those coordinates the moment the line is clear. That water source north of town. The documentation needs to be precise." "The springs." O'Malley hesitated. "But the tribe, they have been there since before the Spanish came." Amos smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. They remained flat and cold, like stones at the bottom of a river. "History is a story we tell about the past. O'Malley, the law is a tool we use to build the future. If the papers say the water belongs to the Red Willow Township, then the water belongs to the township. And since I own 51% of the township's development board, well," he let the sentence hang. He did not need to finish it. Everyone knew Amos Hale played a game where the rules changed depending on who was holding the pen. Through the thickening brown mist haze of the street, Amos saw a rider emerge. The horse was skittish, fighting the wind. The rider was startling. Amos took the cigar from his mouth. He had seen big men before. He had hired brawlers and ox handlers. But this stranger was different. He was not just tall, he was vast, yet he moved with a strange, loping grace. The stranger wore a courier's leather bag and a coat that had seen better decades. "Well, now," Amos said softly. "Look at that." "A giant," O'Malley whispered, crossing himself. "A man," Amos corrected, though his tone suggested he was evaluating a prize bull. "A man who looks like he could lift a wagon axle by himself, or break a neck with one hand." Amos Hale was always in the market for tools. Some tools were made of paper, like the deeds he forged. Some were made of steel, like the rails approaching from the east, and some were made of flesh and bone. He watched the giant dismount in front of the livery stable, noticing how the stranger kept his head down, how he seemed to apologize to the very air for disturbing it. "Interesting," Amos said. He dropped the cigar and crushed it beneath his polished boot. "Very interesting." Silas felt the eyes of the town on him the moment his boots hit the dirt. It was a sensation he had known since he was 12 years old, the prickle on the back of his neck, the sudden hush in conversation. Red Willow was hunkering down for the storm. People were rushing to close shutters and bring in laundry, but they paused to gawk. Look at the size of him. Is it a man or a bear on hind legs? Silas kept his brim low. He led his horse into the livery stable. The stable boy, a kid of maybe 14 with a face full of freckles, dropped the bucket he was holding. Water splashed over the straw. "Easy, son," Silas said. His voice was a deep rumble, vibrating in his own chest. "Just need a stall for the night. And oats, good oats. He has come a long way." The boy stared, his mouth open. Yes, sir, sir." Silas placed a coin on a barrel head. "That should cover it." He walked out before the boy could ask the questions that were clearly burning on his tongue. "How tall are you? What do you eat? Is your father a tree?" Silas had heard them all. He made his way toward the hotel, fighting the wind. The town of Red Willow was essentially one main street, lined with buildings that tried to look grander than they were with false fronts and painted signs. The bulletin board outside the marshal's office was flapping violently. Silas caught glimpses of the notices tacked there: cattle auction Saturday, reward for horse thieves, railroad jobs men wanted. The social conflict of the town was pasted right there on the wood. Hand-scrawled notes were pinned over official documents. No water for railroad was scrawled in charcoal over a surveyor's map. Progress pays was written on another. He always ducked through the door of the Golden Sage Inn. The lobby was quiet, a refuge from the howling wind. A clock ticked on the wall. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up. He adjusted his glasses, blinked, and then pushed his chair back, scraping it loudly against the floorboards. "Help you?" the clerk squeaked. "I need a room," Silas said. "Just to wash up. I have an appointment." "The beds are standard length," the clerk said defensively, as if Silas was accusing him of something. "We do not have special furniture." "The floor will do if the bed is short," Silas said. He was used to sleeping curled up. "I just need water and soap." He paid $2, an exorbitant rate, but he did not argue. He went up the stairs, the wood groaning in protest under his weight. In the small room, he stripped off his dusty coat. The mirror on the wall was hung too low. He could only see his chest and chin. He had to crouch to shave. He looked at his reflection. A strong jaw, dark stubble, eyes that were a muddy hazel too light for an Indian, too dark for a white man. He washed the dust from his face. He combed his dark hair. He put on his only clean shirt, a white cotton one that he had saved for this day. It was tight across the shoulders, the sleeves riding up his forearms, but it was clean. "Evelyn," he whispered. He took the letter out again. The address was clear. Number 4, Cottonwood Lane. He waited until the worst of the dust storm had passed. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the wind had died down to a sullen gust. The street was coated in a fresh layer of red powder. Silas walked out. The town was coming alive again. Piano music spilled from the saloon. The smell of frying steak and stale beer drifted on the air. He walked past the church. The doors were open, and he saw the congregation gathering for a Wednesday evening prayer. He saw men in suits and women in bonnets. They looked solid, respectable. They looked like a wall that he could never climb over. He heard a whisper as he passed 2 women near the church gate. "That is him, the stranger." "Mercy, he looks like a heathen totem pole." Silas tightened his jaw and kept walking. He focused on the telegraph poles. The wires overhead buzzed like trapped hornets. He knew how the telegraph worked. He had delivered enough messages to know the power of those dots and dashes. A man could be a hero in the morning and a wanted criminal by noon. all because of a tapping key 1,000 miles away. Information traveled faster than truth in these parts. He reached the corner of the street. The telegraph office sat there, its window glowing with yellow lamplight. Next to it was the sign for Cottonwood Lane. He stopped. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was it, the end of the road, the end of being alone. He looked at the piece of paper in his hand. The ink was slightly smudged from the sweat of his palm. Evelyn Kitt. She had chosen him. She had seen his description. He had been honest in his letters, mostly, and she had said yes. She had promised a home, for the first time in years. Silas Gray allowed himself to feel something dangerous. He allowed himself to feel hope. He stood there, the twilight casting his shadow long and thin down the dusty street, stretching out toward a future that he prayed would not reject him. He took a deep breath, folded the letter, and turned down Cottonwood Lane. The sound of the telegraph key clicking behind him sounded like a countdown. Cottonwood Lane was a deception. It was a strip of civilized order carved out of the anarchic desert, lined with houses that boasted white picket fences and flower beds struggling against the arid climate. To Silas Gray, walking down this street felt like walking through a museum of a life he was not permitted to touch. He checked his reflection in a darkened window one last time. He smoothed his hair. He dusted off his coat. He took a breath that filled his massive lungs, trying to calm the tremor in his hands. He was a man who could shoot a coin out of the air at 50 paces, yet the prospect of knocking on a door terrified him. Number 4 was a neat, 2-story structure with a wraparound porch. Lamps glowed warmly from inside. He could hear voices muffled, polite conversation. He stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked loudly under his weight, a traitorous sound that announced his heaviness to the world. Silas knocked. 3 solid raps. The conversation inside ceased instantly. A moment later, the door swung open. A woman stood there. She was exactly as her photograph had promised, petite, with hair the color of wheat straw and eyes that held a nervous flutter. She wore a dress of pale blue silk that seemed impossibly clean for Red Willow. This was Evelyn Kitt. Behind her stood a small committee of witnesses, customary for a mail-order arrangement where propriety was paramount. There was a man wearing a clerical collar, likely the local preacher. There was an older woman with a pinched face, clutching a handkerchief. And leaning against the mantel was a man with a tin star pinned to his vest. Deputy Thorne. Silas removed his hat, holding it against his chest like a shield. "Miss Kitt," he said. His voice was a low rumble, soft as he could make it. "I am Silas Gray." Evelyn Kitt did not smile. She did not step back to invite him in. She stood frozen in the doorway, her hand gripping the latch so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes traveled up from his boots, past his waist, up the expanse of his chest. Finally, and finally, she had to tilt her head back sharply to meet his gaze. She stared. It was not the look of a woman seeing her future husband. It was the look of a child seeing a wolf at the window. "You?" she whispered. "I received your letter, ma'am," Silas said, fighting the urge to slouch. "I have traveled from the Arizona border." Evelyn took a step back, almost stumbling into the hallway. She looked at the Reverend, then back at Silas. Her chest heaved. "He is huge," she said. It was not a compliment. It was an accusation. "The advertisement said tall. Miss Kitt," the Reverend said gently, stepping forward. "Mr. Gray stated his height in his correspondence." "Paper is not flesh," Evelyn's voice shrilled, rising in pitch. She looked at Silas again, and this time there was genuine fear in her eyes. "Look at him. He blocks out the moon. He would crush me. He is not natural." Silas felt the blood drain from his face. He had expected awkwardness. He had expected hesitation. He had not expected horror. "Miss Evelyn," Silas said, and he took one step forward, extending a hand. "I am a gentle man. I have a trade. I have—" "Stop!" she shrieked, recoiling as if he had brandished a knife. "Do not come in. You cannot fit in here." The commotion had drawn attention. Neighbors were stepping out onto their porches. A few men from the saloon down the street had wandered over. drawn by the woman's cry. They gathered at the picket fence, peering into the yard. "What is it?" someone shouted. "Evelyn is calling off the dog." Another laughed. Evelyn seemed to gain strength from the audience. She straightened her spine, though she still refused to look Silas in the eye. She looked at his chin instead. "You are too tall," she said. The words were clear, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I cannot marry you. I will not sign the papers. You are simply too much. It is grotesque." The word hung in the air. Grotesque. Silas stood motionless. He felt stripped naked. The rejection was not about his money, or his past, or his bloodline. It was about the very frame of his existence. He was being rejected for the crime of occupying space. "Miss Kitt," Silas said, his voice straining to remain steady. "I have ridden 300 miles. I spent my savings on the journey because you promised a contract. If you will not have me, that is your right. But I ask that you reimburse my travel, or at least provide the lodging you promised for the night. I have nowhere else to go." Evelyn looked at the deputy. "Make him go away. Deputy, he frightens me." Deputy Thorne stepped onto the porch. He was a man of average build, trying to look imposing next to a mountain. He rested his hand on his gun belt. "You heard the lady. Stranger," Thorne said. "Business is concluded. No contract was signed. You have no claim here." "I have a letter," Silas said, holding up the crumpled paper. "A promise. A letter is not a marriage license," Thorne said. He smirked, playing to the crowd. "Besides, where would we put you? We do not have a bed long enough. You might have to sleep standing up like a horse." Laughter rippled through the crowd at the gate. "Hey, flagpole!" a drunken voice shouted. "Watch out for low clouds. Maybe he can change the bulbs in the street lamps without a ladder." Silas looked at Evelyn one last time. She was looking at the floor, refusing to witness the humiliation she had orchestrated. She was small, he realized, not just in stature, but in spirit. She wanted a husband to display like a porcelain doll on a shelf, and he was too wild, too large, too real for her delicate sensibilities. "Keep your money," Silas said. His voice cut through the laughter, cold and final. "I would not fit in this house anyway. It is too small for a man with a spine." He turned and walked down the steps. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide berth. They mocked him, but they were afraid to touch him. He walked through the gauntlet of jeers, his eyes fixed on the darkness at the end of the street. He did not run. He walked with a slow, heavy rhythm, each step driving the anger deeper into his gut where it began to burn like a coal. Silas returned to the Golden Sage Inn, but the atmosphere had changed. The clerk, who had been merely dismissive before, was now openly hostile. The news from Cottonwood Lane had traveled faster than Silas could walk. "We are full," the clerk said the moment Silas walked through the door. "I paid for a room," Silas said, leaning his hands on the counter. The wood groaned. "I have the key in my pocket." "Refund," the clerk said, slamming $2 silver onto the counter. "The management reserves the right to refuse service. We do not want trouble. Miss Kitt is a respected woman. If you scared her, you are not welcome under this roof." Silas looked at the silver coins spinning on the wood. He could argue. He could reach across the counter and shake the little man until his teeth rattled. But that would only prove them right. Monster, savage, brute. He swept the coins into his palm. "You are a brave man when you have a mob behind you," Silas said quietly. He turned and walked out into the night. The wind had picked up again, biting with the chill of the high desert. Silas walked to the edge of town, past the last of the shacks, to a cluster of mesquite bushes near the dry creek bed. He unrolled his bedroll on the hard earth. He lay on his back, staring up at the stars. They were the only things that did not look at him with judgment. They were vast and distant, indifferent to the small cruelties of men. His stomach growled. He had not eaten since morning. He closed his eyes, trying to sleep, but his mind kept replaying the scene on the porch. "Too tall," the words echoed in the silence. "Sometime after midnight, the world exploded. It started with a sound like a thunderclap, followed by a roar that was not wind. Silas sat up. To the east, near the railroad tracks. A pillar of fire was clawing its way into the black sky. It was the warehouse district. Specifically, it was the large supply depot owned by Amos Hale. Silas stood up. Even from this distance, he could hear the panic. Bells began to ring, the frantic, discordant clanging of the church bell and the fire bell. Men were shouting, "Firewater, get the bucket line!" Silas hesitated. His instinct was to run toward the danger, to help. He had fought fires before. He had the strength to pull down beams and carry water barrels that two men would struggle with. He took a step toward the town. Then he stopped. He remembered the look in Evelyn's eyes. He remembered the deputy's smirk. If he walked into that chaos now, a stranger and an outcast, they would not see a helper. They would see a convenient explanation. He sank back down into the shadows of the mesquite. He watched the orange glow pulse and dance, consuming the winter feed and the timber meant for the railroad. Unbeknownst to Silas, he was not the only one watching. On a ridge overlooking the town, Ayanna Redfeather sat on her heels. She saw the fire lick the roof of the warehouse. She saw the men running like ants whose hill had been kicked. And she saw something else. Earlier, before the fire bloomed, she had seen a shadow slip away from the back of the warehouse. It was not a large shadow. It was a man of average size, moving with the quick, furtive movements of a coyote. He had vanished into the alleyways near the saloon. Now, Ayanna shifted her gaze to the outskirts of town, where the giant had made his camp. She saw him stand up and then sit back down. "Smart," she whispered in her native tongue. "Stay in the dark. Tall one, the light will only burn you." She understood what was happening. She had seen Amos Hale looking at his own warehouse earlier that week with a calculating eye. The warehouse was old. The insurance on it was likely new. And with the railroad coming, a man might need liquid cash more than he needed bales of hay. But a fire needed a spark. And a crime needed a criminal. Down in the town, the bucket brigade was failing. The fire was too hot, fed by oil and dry timber. Amos Hale stood near the perimeter, his face illuminated by the flames. He looked devastated. He held his head in his hands. It was a convincing performance. "Migraine," Amos wailed. "The Winterstock who would do this." Deputy Thorne was beside him, coughing in the smoke. "It could be a spark. Mr. Hale, the wind." "No spark starts inside a locked cellar," Amos shouted, grabbing the deputy's lapel. "This was arson. Thorne, I saw the lock broken. And Mrs. Higgins. Where is Mrs. Higgins?" A shrill voice piped up from the crowd. "I am here, I saw it." An old woman, wearing a nightgown and a shawl, pointed a trembling finger toward the darkness. "I was closing my shutters. I saw him running away just before the boom. A shadow. A huge shadow." The crowd went quiet, the roar of the fire filling the silence. "How huge?" Amos asked, his voice sharp. "Enormous," the woman cried. "Like a tree walking. He had to duck to get under the telegraph wire." It was a lie. The telegraph wires were 20 feet in the air, but fear does not understand geometry. "The stranger," someone muttered. "The giant," another said. "He was angry," a man shouted. "I heard him at Evelyn's house. He was shouting about money. He said the town was too small for him." The mood of the crowd shifted instantly. The fear of the fire transformed into the fury of a mob. They needed something to hit. They needed a reason for their loss. Deputy Thorne looked at Amos Hale. Amos gave a barely perceptible nod. "Get the posse," Thorne ordered. "He cannot be hard to find." Silas was drifting into a light, uneasy sleep when the sound of hooves woke him. It was not one horse. It was 6. He rolled to his feet, grabbing his coat. They were coming straight for him. The moonlight glinted off rifle barrels. "There he is," Thorne's voice cracked like a whip. "Surround him." Silas backed up against the prickly wall of the mesquite bush. He raised his hands slowly. "I am unarmed," he said. "I am just sleeping." Deputy Thorne jumped down from his horse, his pistol drawn. 5 other men encircled Silas, their face twisted with adrenaline and hate. "Sleeping after a hard night's work," Thorne sneered. "Turning handles lighting matches." "I do not know what you are talking about," Silas said. "I have been here since the innkeeper threw me out." "Liar!" Thorne spat. "Mrs. Higgins saw you. She saw a giant running from Hale's warehouse right before it went up." Silas felt a cold weight settle in his chest. It was the weight of inevitability. "I was nowhere near the warehouse. Look at my boots. There is no soot. Look at my hands. No oil. We will look at you through the bars of a cell," Thorne said. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." One of the men stepped forward with a pair of iron cuffs. He hesitated, looking at Silas's thick wrists. "They might not fit," the man muttered. "Make them fit," Thorne ordered. The man shoved Silas against the bush. Silas felt the thorns bite into his coat. He felt the cold steel ratchet onto his wrists. The metal bit into his skin, tight and pinching, but they clicked shut. "You are making a mistake," Silas said. He did not struggle. Struggling would only give them an excuse to shoot him. "I came here to get married?" "Yeah, well," Thorne said, holstering his gun. "Looks like you got screwed instead." The men laughed, a nervous, jagged sound, as they shoved him toward the horses, forcing him to walk while they rode. Silas looked back toward the town. The fire was dying down, but the smoke blotted out the stars. He realized then that the letter from Evelyn Kitt had never been about marriage. A man like Amos Hale did not let coincidences happen. The rejection had been public. The anger had been witnessed. He had been painted as a monster in the afternoon so he could be hunted as a villain in the evening. He was not a groom. He was a scapegoat. From the high ridge, Ayanna watched the line of horses lead the tall man back toward the jailhouse. The wind carried the scent of burnt wood and injustice. "Conflict with nature is easy," she said to the darkness. "The wind just wants to kill you, but men want to break you first." She stood up. She had seen enough. The railroad wanted land. The rancher wanted water. And now they had a monster to blame for whatever violence they planned next. She touched the knife at her belt. She would not intervene tonight. But tomorrow, the tall man would need more than just height to survive Red Willow. He would need the truth. And, currently, she was the only one holding it. Silas Gray walked into the town of Red Willow for the second time that day. The first time. He had walked with hope. Now, he walked in chains. And as the jail cell door slammed shut, a heavy final sound of iron on iron, Silas realized that the walls of this room were the only things in town that were not afraid to hold him. He sat on the narrow cot, his knees drawn up to his chest, and listened to the wind howl outside, sounding exactly like a woman screaming. The morning sun hit the dusty street of Red Willow with the force of a hammer. But inside the jailhouse, the air remained stale and cold. The heavy iron door groaned open, crying out for oil. Deputy Thorne stood in the doorway, a ring of keys jangling in his hand. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red, likely from a night spent drinking rather than investigating. "Get up, Gray," Thorne muttered. "The circuit judge is not due for another 2 weeks, and I am not feeding a giant on the county's dime without a charge that will stick." Silas unfolded himself from the cot. His joints popped, sounding like dry twigs snapping. He stood to his full height, forcing Thorne to take an instinctive step back. "Am too free to go?" Silas asked, his voice rough from thirst. "You are free to leave my jail," Thorne corrected. "But the mayor and Mr. Hale have come to an agreement. You have 24 hours to clear out of Red Willow. If I see your face when the sun comes up tomorrow, I will shoot you for vagrancy and save the hangman the trouble." Silas stepped out into the office. His belongings were on the desk, his pocket knife, his few coins, and the letter. He picked up the letter. Amos Hale was sitting in the corner on a wooden chair that looked ready to collapse under his tailored suit. He was peeling an apple with a small, pearl-handled knife. An unfortunate misunderstanding," Amos said smoothly, not looking up from the fruit. "The town is on edge. Mr. Gray, fire makes men irrational." Silas put his hat on. "It makes them look for someone to blame." Amos sliced a piece of apple and popped it into his mouth. "Indeed, but I am a businessman. I hate to see raw material go to waste. You have a distinctive physical presence. I could use a man who imposes order." Amos stood up, wiping the knife on a silk handkerchief. He walked over to Silas, stopping a safe distance away. "Leave town," Amos said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Or sign a paper admitting that you dropped a lantern by accident in my warehouse. Do that, and I will give you $50 and a ticket to California. You can be a clumsy oaf in San Francisco, and everyone here sleeps better." Silas looked down at the man. $50 was more money than he had seen in a year. It was a way out. It was safe safety. But it was also a lie that would brand him a criminal forever. "I did not drop a lantern," Silas said. "And I do not sell my name." Amos sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "Pity. Integrity is expensive. Mr. Gray, I hope you can afford it." Silas walked out of the jailhouse into the blinding glare. The town was busy, but the bubble of silence moved with him. People crossed the street to avoid his shadow. He went to the livery stable. The boy was there, looking terrified. I fed him, sir," the boy stammered, pointing to Silas's bay horse. "Thank you," Silas said. He saddled the horse, his movements mechanical. He needed to leave. He had no friends here, no prospects, and now, a timeline on his life. He rode the horse to the water trough near the saloon to let the beast drink, while the horse dipped its muzzle into the water. Silas pulled the letter from his pocket. He wanted to tear it up. He wanted to scatter Evelyn Kitt's lies to the wind. But as the sunlight hit the paper, something caught his eye. He held it closer. The handwriting was elegant, looping script. "Meet me on October the 15th. He frowned. The ink on the word 15th had a slightly different sheen than the rest of the sentence. It was darker, fresher, and the ink on the location Cottonwood Lane was also subtly different, as if it had been written over a previous, erased pencil mark. Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The date had been changed. The location had been emphasized. He had not just been rejected. He had been scheduled. Someone had ensured he would be at that house, at that specific hour, creating a spectacle right before the fire started. He was staring at the papers so intently, he did not hear the boots crunching on the gravel behind him until the hammer of a pistol clicked. "You should have taken the $50. Freak," a voice growled. Silas turned slowly. 3 men stood at the mouth of the alley between the saloon and the dry goods store. They were not lawmen. They were rough, smelling of unwashed wool and stale whiskey. Hired muscle. "I am leaving," Silas said, raising his hands. "Just let me mount up." "Boss says you might not make it to the county line," the leader said. He was a squat man with a scar running through his eyebrow. "He worries you might talk to the wrong people on the way out. Better you have an accident right here." The squat man lunged, swinging a heavy wooden club. Silas blocked the blow with his forearm, the impact jarring his bone, but he did not buckle. He shoved the man back, sending him sprawling into the dust. But the other 2 were on him. One jumped on his back, wrapping an arm around his throat. Silas thrashed, reaching back to grab the man's coat, but the 3rd man kicked him hard in the knee. Silas went down to one knee, the breath hissing out of him. The world spun. He was strong, but he was tired, and they were fighting dirty. The squat man scrambled up, raising the club for a killing blow to the head. Crack! The sound was not the club hitting bone. It was the sharp, flat report of a rifle lever being racked, followed by the thud of wood hitting flesh. A stone, no, not a stone. A heavy bolus made of rawhide and lead weights whipped out of the shadows and wrapped around the squat man's neck. He gagged, dropping the club, clawing at his throat. "Let him go," a voice said. It was not loud, but it cut through the violence like a cold blade. Silas shook the man off his back and looked up. Standing on top of a stack of crates at the end of the alley was a woman. She wore buckskins that had seen miles of hard use, and her hair was braided tight against her scalp. It was the woman he had seen on the ridge. She held a Henry repeating rifle, the barrel steady. "This does not concern you. Squaw!" One of the thugs spat. Reaching for his gun, the woman fired. The bullet did not hit the man. It hit the dirt exactly 1 inch from his boot toe, kicking up a spray of red dust. "The next one takes the toe," she said. Her eyes shifted to Silas. "Get on your horse, unless you enjoy bleeding." The thugs hesitated. They were paid to beat a drifter, not to fight a warrior who clearly knew how to shoot. Silas did not need to be told twice. He vaulted into the saddle, the adrenaline masking the pain in his knee. He spurred the bay. "Follow me if you want to live," the woman said. She jumped down from the crates, landing lightly on the back of a waiting paint horse. She spun the animal around and galloped toward the north, away from the main road, toward the jagged scar of the canyon lands. Silas followed. Behind them, shouts erupted, but the confusion bought them seconds. They rode hard, the wind whipping their faces, leaving the town of Red Willow behind in a cloud of dust. They rode for 2 hours without speaking. The terrain changed from flat scrubland to a maze of red sandstone canyons. The walls rose up on either side, casting long, cool shadows. The sky to the west was turning a sickly yellow-green. The wind, which had been gusting all day, suddenly died. The silence was heavy, pressurized. Ayanna pulled her horse to a halt. She looked at the sky, then at Silas. "Sandstorm," she said. "A big one. We need cover." "I can keep riding," Silas said, though his leg was throbbing. "You can ride into the grave if you like," she said, dismounting. "The sand will strip the skin off your face and blind your horse. We shelter here." She led her horse into a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, an overhang that formed a shallow cave. Silas followed, guiding his nervous bay into the cramped space. Minutes later, the world disappeared. The wind returned with a scream. Carrying millions of tons of sand, it turned the day into twilight. Visibility dropped to 0. Silas sat with his back against the stone, pulling his duster over his head. Ayanna sat opposite him, calm, wrapped in a woolen blanket. She offered him a canteen. "Drink," she said, "but slowly. Water is life here." Silas took a sip. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the best thing he had ever tasted. "Thank you," he said. "Back there, in the alley. You saved me." "I saved myself the trouble of burying a body later," she said. Her face was unreadable in the dim light. "I am Ayanna. Silas Gray. I know who you are. Silas Gray. The town talks of nothing else. The giant who burns warehouses." "I did not do it," Silas said firmly. "I know," she said. "I saw you. You were hiding in the bushes like a frightened rabbit while the fire started." Silas flinched. "I was trying to stay out of trouble." "And how did that work out for you?" Silas looked down at his hands. They were large, scarred hands. "Not well." He looked at her. "Why help me, the people in town? They say your kind hates the whites." Ayanna laughed, a short, dry sound. "My kind, you mean the people who were here when your people were still thinking the world was flat. Listen, tall one. I do not hate a man because his skin is pale like a fish belly. I hate men who use paper to steal land and fire to steal water. Amos Hale is one of those men. And you are just a tool he tried to break." "He tampered with my letter," Silas said, pulling the crumbled paper out. "He changed the date. He made sure I was there to be laughed at so everyone would see me angry." Ayanna nodded. "He needs a war. If the town thinks a savage stranger burned the food supply, they will ask for soldiers. If soldiers come, they will push my people off the springs near the North Ridge. Hale wants that water for his cows and the railroad." The storm raged outside for another hour. When it finally broke, the air was still thick with dust, hanging like a golden fog. "We move," Ayanna said. "The wind covers our tracks, but Hale has a tracker, a man named Skinner. He is good. He will find the hoof prints once the dust settles." They pushed deeper into the canyon. The path narrowed, winding up toward a high plateau. The horses struggled on the loose shale. Silas watched Ayanna. She moved with an efficiency that was beautiful to watch. She read the wind, the rocks, the way the lizards moved. She was not fighting the land. She was moving with it. "Get down!" Ayana's hiss was sharp. She pulled her horse behind a large boulder. Ping! A bullet struck the rock inches from Silas's head, sending stone chips flying into his cheek. The sound of the gunshot rolled through the canyon echoes a second later. "Sniper!" Silas shouted, sliding off his horse. "Up there!" Ayana pointed to a ridge 500 yards away. Sun glints glint off a barrel. They were pinned. To get to the next cover, a cluster of juniper trees, they had to cross a gap of open ground about 30 feet wide. "He has the angle on me," Ayana said, checking her rifle. "If I move, he shoots. If I stay, he moves to a better spot and shoots." Silas looked at the gap. Then he looked at Ayana. She was small, compact. "He is looking for a target," Silas said. "I will give him one." "Do not be stupid," Ayana snapped. "You are big, not bulletproof." "I am big enough to block the sun," Silas said. "When I run, I will draw his fire. You go low. Stay in my shadow." "Literally." He did not wait for her to discuss, argue. Silas took a breath, gathered his long legs under him, and sprinted. He did not run like a man fleeing. He ran like a man charging. He made himself wide. He waved his arms. "Hey, up here," he roared, his voice booming off the canyon walls. The sniper took the bait. A bullet kicked up dirt near Silas's heel. Another whizzed past his ear like an angry hornet. Silas kept moving, zigzagging slightly, his massive coat flapping. Behind him, hidden by his bulk and the distraction, Ayana darted across the gap, low and fast. Silas dove behind the juniper trees just as a third bullet stripped the bark off the trunk next to his head. Ayana slid in beside him a second later. She looked at him, her eyes wide. She was breathing hard. "You are crazy." "Did it work?" Silas asked, checking his arm for holes. "He lost us," she said. She looked at him differently now. The disdain was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. "You used your height. Most men curse what makes them different. You just used it as a shield." "I have spent my life trying to shrink," Silas admitted. "It felt good to stand up for a reason." They waited until the sun dipped lower, casting the canyon in deep purple shadow, before moving again. They took a treacherous goat path that Ayana promised the horses could barely manage, knowing the tracker would not risk it in the dark. As they reached the top of the plateau, they came across a line of telegraph poles stretching across the nothingness. Ayana stopped. She dismounted and walked to one of the poles. "Look!" Silas limped over. At the base of the pole, a small box had been jury-rigged into the wire. A secondary line ran from it, buried shallowly in the sand, leading to a hidden spot behind a rock where a man could sit with a portable key. "A tap," Silas said. "This is how they control the news." He knelt down. There was a discarded piece of paper half buried in the sand, likely dropped by whoever had been manning the tap. He brushed the sand away. It was a transcript of a message sent 2 hours ago. "To Fort Union. Urgent. Hostile tribes gathering near Red Willow. Warehouse burned. Citizens in danger. Request cavalry immediately. Signed, Mayor of Red Willow." "Lies," Ayana said, reading over his shoulder. Her voice was cold. "My people are preparing for the corn harvest, not war. Hale is calling down the army to slaughter us so he can take the water." Silas stood up. He looked back toward the direction of the town. He thought of the $50. He thought of the train ticket to California. He could still keep riding west. He could vanish. But he looked at the paper in his hand. He looked at Ayana, whose face was set in a grim mask of determination. For 30 years, Silas had just wanted a house home. He wanted 4 walls and a roof where he could be safe. But looking at the lie that would doom a whole people, he realized that safety bought with silence was no safety at all. "If I leave," Silas said slowly, "they will kill you." "They will try," Ayana said. "They will kill everyone at the springs," Silas corrected. "Because the army believes this paper." He crumpled the message in his fist. The desire to find a wife, to find a soft place to land, evaporated. It was replaced by something harder, something like iron hardening in a forge. I am not going to California, Silas said. Ayanna looked at him. Where are you going? I am going with you, he said. We need to prove this is a lie. We need to stop them. Ayanna studied him for a long moment. She saw the change in him. The hunch in his shoulders was gone. He stood to his full 6 feet 7 inches. For the first time, he did not look awkward. He looked like a mountain that had decided where it belonged. Come, she said softly. I will take you to the water. She led him down a hidden trail on the other side of the plateau. As the moon rose, they descended into a small, lush pocket of green hidden in the desert's folds. The sound of trickling water filled the air, a sound more precious than gold. They had reached the secret camp. It was a place of peace, but Silas knew that war was coming fast, riding on the back of a lie sent over a wire. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to stand his ground and fight for it. The hidden spring was a vein of silver in the dark body of the desert. It bubbled up from deep beneath the sandstone, feeding a small grove of cottonwoods and willow that smelled of wet earth and ancient life. The wind here was different. It did not scream. It whispered. Silas Gray sat on a flat rock near the water's edge. He had stripped off his shirt, and the moonlight mapped the landscape of his torso. He was a tapestry of old violence. There were puckered ridges from shrapnel, thin white lines from knives, and the deep, ugly bruise blooming on his ribs from the fight in the alley. Ayanna knelt beside him. She had a bowl of water mixed with crushed sage and a clean cloth. She did not flinch at the size of him. She did not stare at the scars with morbid curiosity. She worked with the efficient hands of a woman who had seen blood before and knew that it washed off. This one is deep, she said, pressing the cloth against a cut on his shoulder. It is old, Silas rumbled. The sound of his own voice felt too loud in this sanctuary. Got it in the war. A piece of iron from a cannon. I meant the one in your eyes, Ayanna said. She did not look up, but her hand paused on his skin. Silas looked away, toward the black silhouette of the canyon rim. I have spent 30 years trying to make myself smaller. Ayanna, I hunch my shoulders, I lower my head, I speak softly, but it does not matter. When I walk into a room, people see a threat. They see a monster. A monster takes without asking, Ayanna said. She rinsed the cloth, the water turning pink. You stood in front of a bullet for me. That is not what monsters do. That is what shields do. I was rejected by a woman who had never met me, Silas said, the bitterness rising like bile. Evelyn Kitt looked at me and saw something broken. She was right. Ayanna stopped. She dropped the cloth into the bowl and stood up. She was a head shorter than him even when he was sitting. But in that moment, she seemed to tower over him. She did not see something broken, Ayanna said fiercely. She saw something she could not control. There is a difference. She reached out and took his face in her hands. Her palms were rough, calloused from rains and rifle stocks, but her touch was shocking in its gentleness. Listen to me, Silas Gray. Being tall is not a sin. Taking up space is not a sin. Smallness is the sin. Smallness of spirit. Smallness of courage. That is what Evelyn Kitt suffers from. Do not let her sickness become yours. Silas looked at her. In the moonlight, her eyes were dark pools of defiance. For the first time in his life, a woman was touching him not to push him away or to measure him for a coffin, but to hold him there, in the present moment. You should rest, she said, her voice softening. The night is getting cold. The desert freezes the bone before you even feel the shiver. There was a small shelter nearby, a lean-to constructed of cedar branches and woven blankets used by the scouts. It was narrow, meant for survival, not comfort. They crawled inside. The air within was still, smelling of pine needles and dry wool. It was freezing outside, the temperature dropping rapidly as it often did in the high desert. We share the blankets, Ayanna stated. It was not a question. It was a necessity of the frontier. Body heat saves fuel. Silas lay down stiffly on his side, trying to take up as little room as possible. He felt cumbersome. A giant bull in a china shop. Ayanna lay down beside him. She pulled the heavy buffalo robe over them both. For a long time, there was only the sound of their breathing and the wind rustling the dry leaves outside. Then, Silas felt her move. She moved, shifted closer until her back was pressed against his chest. He froze, afraid that if he breathed, he would shatter the moment. "You are warm," she murmured. "I am large," he whispered. "There is a lot of me to hold the heat." "Then share it." She turned over in the darkness to face him. Her hand found his chest, resting over his heart. He could feel the heat of her palm through his undershirt. His heart hammered against her hand, a traitorous, desperate rhythm. "Silas," she said. He looked at her. Her face was inches from his. He could see the faint pulse in her throat. "I am afraid," he admitted, his voice cracking. I am too big. I am clumsy. I break things." "You will not break me," Ayanna said. "I am not made of glass. I am made of the same earth as you." She pulled him closer. It was an invitation, clear and undeniable. Silas hesitated, a lifetime of shame holding him back. But then he looked into her eyes and saw no fear. He saw only a fierce, demanding claim. She was choosing him, not tolerating him. Choosing him. He reached out and touched her cheek. His hand was large enough to crush her skull, but he traced the line of her jaw with the delicacy of a man handling a hummingbird's egg. She leaned into his touch. When he kissed her, it was not the storm he expected. It was the rain after a drought. It was slow. It was deep. It was a conversation without words. He felt the tension leave his muscles, drained away by the warmth of her skin. She kissed him with a hunger that matched his own, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him down, anchoring him to the earth. There was no awkwardness in the dark, only the truth of bodies seeking solace. He learned the curve of her hip. She learned the vastness of his shoulders. The act was not just physical. It was a dismantling of walls, with every touch, every breath shared. Silas felt the title of outcast peeling away. He was not a giant here. He was just a man, and she was just a woman. And they fit together in the darkness as if the universe had carved them for this exact purpose. "I see you," she whispered against his skin later, as the wind howled outside. "I see you, Silas." "I am here," he answered, and for the first time, he meant it. Morning arrived with a pale, gray light that washed out the colors of the canyon. Silas woke first. He lay still for a moment, the memory of the night before wrapping around him warmer than the buffalo robe. Ayanna was asleep on his arm, her breathing deep and even. He did not want to move. He wanted to stay in this suspended reality where he was loved and safe. But the world outside the lean-to did not care about lovers. A sound snapped him to alertness. It was the click of a horseshoe on stone. Silas sat up, his hand instantly going to the revolver he had placed near his boots. Ayanna woke in the same second, her eyes snapping open, her hand reaching for her knife. "Someone is coming," she hissed. They scrambled out of the shelter, crouching low behind the trunk of a large cottonwood. Silas peered through the leaves. A single rider was approaching the spring. He was not riding with the confidence of a soldier or the arrogance of a hired gun. He was slumped in the saddle, looking terrified. He held a white handkerchief tied to a stick, waving it frantically. "Do not shoot," the man called out, his voice cracking. "Please, I am alone." Ayanna lowered her knife slightly. "I know that voice. It is Thomas, the telegraph operator." "A trap?" Silas asked. "He is a coward," Ayanna said. "Cowards do not lead charges. They run from them." She stepped out from the tree, her rifle raised. "Stop there! Thomas, get off the horse slowly!" The man practically fell out of his saddle. He was a young man, thin, with ink-stained fingers and spectacles that were sliding down his nose. He looked like he had not slept in 3 days. "Ayanna!" Thomas gasped, holding his hands up. "And, Mr. Gray, thank God. Give me one reason not to put a bullet in your leg," Silas said, stepping out. His height made Thomas flinch violently. "I brought the book," Thomas said, fumbling with his saddlebag. The logbook, the real one. And the other papers? I could not let them do it. I have a wife, Ayanna. We are expecting a baby. I cannot have blood on my hands when I hold my child." He pulled out a heavy, leather-bound ledger and a sheaf of papers. He threw them on the ground and stepped back. Silas moved forward and picked them up. He opened the ledger. It was the official record of all telegrams sent and received in Red Willow. "Look at the entry for yesterday," Thomas said, his voice trembling. "The one to Fort Union." Silas read it. "Urgent. Hostile action imminent. Request troops." "I know this," Silas said. "We found the tap on the line." "Read the one before it," Thomas said. "From Amos Hale to the territorial governor." Silas ran his finger up the page. The message was coded, but Thomas had written the translation in the margin. "Deal secured. Land rights transfer pending signature. Water access guaranteed for railroad expansion. Remove obstacles by any means." "He sold the water," Ayanna said, her voice cold. "Before he even owned it." "He does not own it yet," Thomas said. "That is the problem. That is why he needed Evelyn Kitt." Silas looked up sharply. "What does Evelyn have to do with this?" Thomas wiped sweat from his forehead. "Evelyn is not just a lonely spinster. Mr. Gray, her father owned the original deed to the plot of land that controls the access road to the spring. When he died, he left it to her. But under the territorial law, a single woman's property rights are complicated, especially since her father died in debt to the bank. The bank that Amos Hale owns," Silas surmised. "Exactly." Thomas nodded. "Hale holds the mortgage. He told Evelyn he would foreclose and throw her on the street unless she signed the land over to the railroad. But the railroad lawyers are sticky about clear titles. They would not accept a deed transfer from a woman in foreclosure without a co-signer or a husband to validate the asset transfer. It is a legal loophole. So she ordered a husband," Silas said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "She did not want a lover. She wanted a signature. She needed a puppet," Thomas said. "Someone grateful, someone stupid, or someone weak. She ordered you because the agency said you were a laborer. She thought she could bully a simple laborer into signing the papers and then send him away with a few dollars. But then I arrived," Silas said. "And you were 6 feet and 7 inches of iron." Thomas said, "You looked her in the eye. You spoke like an educated man." She panicked. She knew she could not manipulate you. She knew that if you read the papers she wanted you to sign, you would ask questions. You were too big to control. So she rejected you. Amos was furious. He had to pivot to his backup plan. "The fire," Ayanna said. "Burn the warehouse. Blame the stranger. Create a panic," Thomas confirmed. "With the town in a frenzy, the mayor can declare a state of emergency. Under emergency law, the town council can seize critical resources like water for the public good, bypassing the deed and the treaty entirely." Silas closed the ledger. The weight of the book felt heavy in his hands. It was a catalog of greed. Amos Hale had manipulated everyone: Evelyn, the town, the army, and Silas playing them like pieces on a chessboard. "When does the army arrive?" Silas asked. 2 days, Thomas said. "But the town meeting is today at noon. High noon. Amos is going to force the vote on the emergency powers. Once the council votes, the sheriff will lead a posse here to seize the spring before the soldiers even get here. They want to be dug in." Ayanna looked at the sun climbing the canyon wall. "It is 10 o'clock now. We have 2 hours. "We have to leave," Silas said. "We head for the border. Mexico." Ayanna looked at him, surprised. "Run?" "No," Silas said. He turned to face her. "If we run, they take the water. Your people die or starve. If we run, Amos wins. I am done running. Ayanna, I am done being the thing people are afraid of in the dark." He looked at Thomas. "Can you ride back and not get caught?" I think so," Thomas said. "Go back," Silas commanded. "Go to the church. Hide in the choir loft. When I step through those doors, you stand up and read that ledger. Loud." "You are going back?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide. "They will shoot you on sight. There is a bounty on your head. Mr. Gray, $500, dead or alive." "Let them try," Silas said. He turned to Ayanna. "This is not my fight by blood, but it is my fight by choice. I will not let them take your home." Ayanna smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Then let us go and ruin their meeting." They saddled the horses in silence. The air between them was electric. The intimacy of the night before had not softened them. It had tempered them. They moved as a unit now. Silas checked his revolver. He had 6 shots. He checked his rifle. 12 shots. "Amos will have his hired guns there," Ayanna warned. "Skinner and his men?" "I know," Silas said. He tightened the cinch on his saddle. "But Amos is a coward. He hides behind the law. We are going to strip the law away from him." He mounted the big bay horse. He felt different in the saddle today. For the first time, he did not feel like a freak of nature. He felt like a force of nature. Ayanna mounted her paint horse. She reached out and squeezed his hand. "Today, tall one, we make them look up." They rode out of the canyon, leaving the sanctuary of the spring behind. They rode back toward the dust, the heat, and the hate of Red Willow. As they crested the final ridge, the town came into view. The church bell was ringing, calling the citizens to the meeting that would seal their fate. The sound was mournful, a death knell for justice. Silas Gray spurred his horse. He was riding into a trap. He knew that, but this time, the trap was not going to catch a rabbit. It was going to catch a bear. And he was bringing the storm with him. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," Ayanna replied. They descended the slope, the hooves of their horses kicking up clouds of red dust that rose like war paint against the blue sky. The rising action was over. The climax was waiting at the bottom of the hill. The nave of the First Church of Red Willow was stiflingly hot. It was 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun was hammering on the roof shingles, turning the wooden structure into a kiln. Every pew was packed. Men stood along the back walls, hats in hands, sweat staining the collars of their Sunday shirts. Women fanned themselves with hymnals, the paper fluttering like the wings of nervous moths. Amos Hale stood at the pulpit. He did not look like a man in the middle of a crisis. He looked like a shepherd guiding a flock through a storm. He gripped the edges of the lectern, his knuckles white, his expression grave. "I take no pleasure in this," Amos said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "No man wants to see martial law in his home. But we are under siege. We all saw the fire. We all know the danger. The savages are gathering at the springs, and that giant, that madman, is leading them." A murmur of fear rippled through the crowd. "The army is days away," Amos continued, raising a hand to silence them. "We cannot wait for salvation. We must save ourselves. I'm asking the council to vote for the emergency decree. Give me the authority to secure the water source. Give Deputy Thorne the power to deputize every able-bodied man. We must strike before they burn our homes." Evelyn Kitt sat in the front row, her face pale. She wore a veil, hiding eyes that were red from weeping. She looked small, shrunken by the weight of the lie she was helping to uphold. "All in favor?" the mayor asked, stepping up beside Amos. "Aye," shouted a dozen men planted in the crowd. "Nay," said a voice from the back. It was not a shout. It was a rumble, deep and resonant, like the earth shifting. The heavy double doors of the church swung open with a violence that made the hinges scream. A silhouette filled the frame, backlit by the blinding white light of the noon sun. The figure was immense, a towering shape that seemed to scrape the lintel. Silas Gray stepped inside. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Silas walked down the center aisle. His boots thudded heavily on the pine floorboards. He was dusty, his coat torn, his face smeared with soot and sweat. But he moved with a terrifying calm. He did not hunch his shoulders. He did not look at the floor. He looked straight ahead. His eyes locked on Amos Hale. "You," Amos whispered, the color draining from his face. "Arrest him. He is the arsonist." Deputy Thorne, standing near the altar, put his hand on his gun but did not draw. He looked at Silas. Then he looked at the open doors behind him. Ayanna Redfeather stepped into the light. A collective gasp went up from the congregation. A woman, an indigenous woman, armed with a rifle and wearing the buckskins of a warrior, was walking into their sanctuary. It was a violation of every social norm Red Willow held dear. "She has a gun!" a woman screamed. "Nobody moves," Ayanna said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the panic. "We are not here to kill. We are here to read." Silas stopped 10 feet from the pulpit. He towered over the seated congregation. For the first time, his height was not a deformity. It was a judgment. He looked down at Amos Hale, who suddenly seemed very small behind his wooden fortress. "You told them I burned the warehouse," Silas said. "We have witnesses." "Sir," Amos shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "Get him! Thorn! Shoot him!" "I did not burn your grain." "Amos," Silas said, "you burned it. You burned it because the insurance money pays more than the market price, and because you needed a fire to scare these people into giving you the water rights." "Lies!" Amos screamed. "He is a savage. Do not listen to him." "And Evelyn." Silas turned his gaze to the woman in the front row. Evelyn flinched as if he had struck her. "Tell them, Evelyn, tell them why you rejected me. Was I too tall, or was I just too inconveniently literate to sign a fraudulent deed?" Evelyn put her hands over her face and began to sob. "Enough of this," Amos yelled. He looked at the back of the room where Skinner and his hired thugs were standing. "Remove them! Wait!" The shout came from the choir loft above. Thomas, the telegraph operator, stood up from behind the railing. He was trembling, clutching the heavy ledger to his chest like a shield. "I have the proof," Thomas yelled, his voice cracking with terror. "I have the logbook." "Thomas, sit down," Amos roared. "Read it," Silas commanded, his voice booming. Thomas opened the book. Telegram sent yesterday at 4 o'clock. From Amos Hale to the Union Pacific Directorate. Text reads, "Panic induced. Local government pliable. Water rights seizure imminent. Send surveyor to confirm the deed, confirm deed transfer." The room erupted. People turned to each other, their faces masks of confusion and anger. "He sold us out." "The water, but that belongs to the town." "He is lying," Amos shouted, sweat pouring down his face. "That book is a forgery. They are all working together." "And the deed," Silas said, reaching into his coat. He pulled out the papers Thomas had given him. "This is the deed to the Kit property. It has a signature on it, a signature dated 3 days ago. But Evelyn Kit is sitting right there, and she has not signed anything." Silas held the paper up. "Who signed this?" "Amos. Did you sign it for her?" Amos Hale looked at the crowd. He saw the doubt in their eyes. He saw the mayor stepping away from him. The illusion of the benevolent leader was dissolving, revealing the predator underneath. "It does not matter," Amos snarled. He pulled a Derringer pistol from his vest pocket. "Skinner, kill them all." Skinner, the scarred man from the alley, did not hesitate. He drew his revolver and fired at Silas. The bullet struck Silas in the left shoulder, spinning him around. The impact was like a sledgehammer, but Silas did not fall. He roared, a sound of pure defiance, and grabbed the heavy oak pew next to him. With a heave of superhuman strength, he ripped the bench from its floor bolts and flipped it onto its side, creating a barricade just as a volley of gunfire erupted from the back of the room. "Get down," Silas shouted to the civilians. Chaos swallowed the church. Women screamed, dragging their children under the benches. The stained glass window above the altar shattered, raining colored shards of glass down on the choir. Ayanna vaulted over a pew, sliding into cover. She leveled her Henry rifle and fired. She did not shoot to kill. She shot the gun out of a thug's hand. The man screamed, dropping his weapon. "Thorn!" Amos screamed, ducking behind the pulpit. "Do your job!" Deputy Thorn stood frozen. He held his Colt Navy revolver, his eyes darting between Amos and the chaos. He saw Skinner grabbing Evelyn Kit by her hair, dragging her up from the floor. "Back off!" Skinner yelled, pressing the barrel of his gun to Evelyn's temple. "I will blow her brains out! Drop the guns!" The shooting stopped instantly. Silence returned, heavy and smelling of cordite. Silas pressed his hand to his shoulder. Blood was seeping between his fingers, dark and hot. He breathed heavily, looking at Evelyn. Her eyes were wide with terror, fixed on him. She was looking at the man she had called a monster, begging him to save her. "Let her go, Skinner," Silas said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly steady. "You are not getting paid enough for this. I am walking out of here," Skinner shouted. "And she is coming with me." "Amos is done," Ayanna called out from behind a pillar. "Look at him. He is finished. Do not die for a dead man's money." Skinner looked at Amos. The rancher was crouched behind the pulpit, reloading his small pistol, his eyes manic. "Kill them," Amos shrieked. "I will pay you double $10,000. Skinner hesitated. Greed warred with survival. In that split second of hesitation, a child, the stable boy who had fed Silas's horse, popped his head up from a pew near the front, trying to crawl to his mother. "Get down, boy!" Skinner jerked his gun toward the movement, firing blindly in panic. The bullet smashed into the wood inches from the boy's head. Splinters flew. The boy screamed. That was the turning point. Deputy Thorne, who had spent his life walking the line between the law and the men who paid for it, finally stepped off the line. He raised his Colt. "No more," Thorne gritted out. He fired. The bullet hit Skinner in the shoulder, spinning him away from Evelyn. Evelyn screamed and scrambled away on her hands and knees. Silas moved. He did not run. He launched himself. He covered the distance to the pulpit in 3 massive strides. Amos Hale stood up, raising his derringer to shoot Silas in the face. Silas did not dodge. He swatted the gun aside with his good hand as if it were a toy. He grabbed Amos by the lapels of his expensive gray suit and lifted him off the ground. Amos Hale kicked and flailed, his feet dangling 6 inches above the floorboards. He clawed at Silas's wrists, but he might as well have been clawing at stone. "Put me down," Amos squealed. "I own this town, I own you." Silas brought Amos's face close to his own. The rancher smelled of fear and expensive cologne. "You own nothing," Silas rumbled. "You thought you could buy the land, the water, and the truth. You thought you could buy a husband for Evelyn and a scapegoat for your fire. But you forgot one thing. Amos." "What?" Amos gasped, his face turning purple. "You forgot that when you push a man into a corner, you better make sure he is not big enough to bring the whole house down on top of you." Silas threw him. He did not throw him hard, just tossed him like a sack of feed. Amos slid across the floor, crashing into the communion rail. He tried to scramble up, but he found himself looking down the barrel of Ayanna's rifle. "Stay," Ayanna said, "or I will give you a third eye." Skinner's men, seeing their boss defeated and the deputy turned against them, dropped their weapons. They raised their hands. The church was quiet again, save for the sobbing of the stable boy and the heavy breathing of Silas Gray. Deputy Thorne walked over to Skinner, who was groaning on the floor, and kicked the gun away. He looked at Silas. "You are bleeding. Gray," Thorne said. There was no mockery in his voice now, only exhaustion. "I have had worse," Silas said. He turned to the congregation. They were slowly emerging from their hiding spots. They looked at Silas, then at Ayanna, then at the cowering Amos Hale. The spell of fear was broken, replaced by the cold, hard light of reality. Evelyn Kitt stood up. Her dress was torn, her hair wild. She walked over to Silas. She had to crane her neck to look him in the eye. "You came back," she whispered. "After what I said, after what I did. I did not come back for you," Silas said gently. He looked at Ayanna, who was standing guard over Amos. "I came back because the truth deserves a defense." Evelyn looked down at her hands. I am sorry. He threatened my father's legacy. I was afraid." "Fear makes us small," Silas said. "I know that better than anyone." The mayor, sensing the shift in the wind, stepped forward, trying to regain some dignity. "Deputy, arrest Mr. Hale and Skinner. We will sort this out." "You will sort nothing out," Ayanna said, stepping forward. The logbook goes to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe. If you try to bury this, we will tap the wire again and tell the whole world what happened here." The mayor swallowed hard and nodded. Silas walked out of the church. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain in his shoulder was becoming a white-hot lance. He stumbled slightly. Ayanna was there instantly, her arm around his waist, taking his weight. "I have you," she said. They walked out into the sunlight. The town of Red Willow looked the same as it had an hour ago, dusty, brown, beaten by the wind. But the feeling was different. The invisible web of lies that had choked the streets was torn. Silas looked at his hands. They were covered in blood, but they were steady. He looked at Ayanna. "Is it over?" he asked. Ayanna looked toward the east, where the railroad tracks were still inching closer every day. The company would not stop just because one man failed. The water was still valuable. The land was still desired. "No," she said. "The snake has lost its head, but the body still writhes. They will send others, lawyers, soldiers maybe." She looked up at him. "But today, we won." Deputy Thorne stepped out onto the porch of the church. He lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. He watched the giant and the warrior walk toward the livery stable. "Hey, Gray," Thorne called out. Silas turned. "You have 24 hours to leave town," Thorne said. It was the old line, but the tone was different. It was a joke. A dark, dry olive branch. "I am not going anywhere," Silas called back. "I like the view." Thorne smirked and tipped his hat. Inside the church, the people of Red Willow began to turn on Amos Hale. The shouts of anger were loud, but Silas did not listen. He was listening to the wind. It sounded less like a scream now and more like a song. He mounted his horse, gritting his teeth against the pain. Ayanna mounted beside him. "To the doctor?" she asked. "To the doctor," he agreed. "And then, home." "You do not have a home, Silas," she teased gently. Silas looked at her. He looked at the way the sun caught the black braid of her hair. He looked at the space between them, which was no longer empty, but filled with a trust that was stronger than steel. "I think I do," he said. They rode down the main street. This time, no one laughed. No one called names. The town of Red Willow watched in silence as the giant and the scout rode past. They were not looking at a freak show anymore. They were looking at a legend. But legends bleed. And as they turned the corner toward the doctor's house, Silas felt the world go gray at the edges. The battle was won, but the cost was etched in red on his coat. "Ayanna," he murmured, swaying in the saddle. She reached out, grabbing his arm. "Stay with me, tall one. Do not dare close your eyes. Just resting," he whispered. The climax had broken the town, but it had also broken something in Silas. The armor he had worn for 30 years, the armor of isolation, was gone. He was vulnerable now. And as darkness took him, the only thing tethering him to the earth was the grip of the woman who had taught him that height was not just for reaching the sky, but for sheltering the things you love. The dust from the church floor had settled, but the air in Red Willow remained heavy, charged with the static electricity of a storm that had not fully broken. The shootout was over. The physical battle had ended when Amos Hale hit the floorboards. But the war for the soul of the town and for the future of the water had simply changed battlefields. It had moved from the barrel of a gun to the cold, sharp edges of the law. Silas Gray sat on the edge of a narrow examination table in the office of Dr. Miller. The room smelled of carbolic acid and stale tobacco. His left shoulder was bandaged heavily, the white linen stark against his dark skin. The bullet had passed through the flesh without shattering the bone. A stroke of luck that the doctor attributed to divine providence and Silas attributed to Amos Hale's shaking hand. "You are a lucky man, Mr. Gray," Dr. Miller said, wiping his hands on a towel. 2 inches to the right, and you would be paralyzed. As it is, you will be stiff when it rains, but you will keep the arm. I have been stiff for 10 years. Doctor, Silas grunted, testing the movement of his shoulder. Pain flared, hot and bright, but it was a manageable pain. It was the pain of survival. Ayanna stood by the window, looking out at the street. She had not left his side since the church. She still held her rifle, though the barrel was pointed at the floor. "The town is quiet," she said. "Too quiet, like a held breath." "They are waiting to see who falls next," Silas said. He reached for his shirt, wincing as he pulled it over his good arm. The door to the medical office opened. It was not a lawman, and it was not a friend. It was Evelyn Kitt. She looked nothing like the woman who had stood on her porch a few days ago. Surrounded by her committee of judgment, her silk dress was stained with dust from the church floor. Her hat was gone. Her face was stripped of powder and pretense, leaving her looking older, tired, and remarkably ordinary. Ayanna tensed, her hand tightening on the rifle stock, but Silas shook his head slightly. "Miss Kitt," Silas said. His voice was low. Evelyn did not step fully into the room. She hovered in the doorway, holding onto the frame as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "I came to return this," she said. She held out a small velvet pouch. It contained the travel money Silas had sent her months ago, money he had saved for a year to pay for his journey to a new life. Silas looked at the pouch. "I do not want it." "Take it," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "Please, I have nothing else to give you. Amos called the loan. The bank took the house an hour ago. They said since I admitted the deed was unsigned in front of witnesses, the foreclosure is immediate. I'm on the street. Silas." There was a bitter irony in it. The woman who had rejected him because he did not fit into her picture of a perfect life now had no frame to put a picture in at all. "You hurt me, Evelyn," Silas said. He did not say it with anger, but with a flat, heavy honesty. "You looked at me, and you made me feel like an animal." "You used my hope against me." "I know." Tears spilled down her dusty cheeks. "I was afraid of what people would say. I thought if I had a handsome husband, a normal husband, the town would respect me. I thought I could hide my debts behind a smile. But when the shooting started, when Skinner grabbed me, you were the only one who looked at me like a human being. Even after what I did." She placed the money on the small table near the door. "I am leaving Red Willow. I'm going to my sister in Denver. I just wanted you to know I was wrong. Not about the height, about the heart." She turned and walked away. Silas watched her go. He felt a weight lift from his chest, a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. He had spent his life thinking he was the one who was lacking, the one who didn't measure up. But looking at Evelyn's retreating back, he realized that he was whole. It was the world that was fractured. The victory at the church had removed Amos Hale, but it had not removed the railroad. That afternoon, a man in a black suit arrived at the jailhouse where Amos was being held. He carried a briefcase and walked with the precise, clipped gait of a man who billed his time by the minute. He was Mr. Sterling, the legal representative for the Union Pacific expansion. He did not ask to see Amos. He asked to see Silas and Ayanna. They met in the sheriff's office. Deputy Thorne sat behind the desk, looking uncomfortable. He was technically the law now, but against the railroad, a tin star felt like a piece of foil. Sterling placed a document on the desk. "This is a cease and desist order," he said. His voice was dry, lacking any inflection. "And this is a petition for federal intervention regarding the hostility of local tribes impeding interstate commerce." "Hostility?" Ayanna laughed, a sharp, dangerous sound. "We defended ourselves against a murderer." That is one version of the truth," Sterling said, adjusting his cuffs. "The railroad has another version. Our version says that a rogue element of the tribe, led by a violent drifter with a criminal record of arson, attacked a peaceful town meeting. Amos Hale may be a loose cannon, but his contract with us is valid. The water rights are essential for the steam engines. If you continue to block access to the springs, we will not send hired guns. We will send the United States Cavalry." Silas leaned forward. The chair creaked under his bulk. "You are threatening a massacre to fill a boiler. I am stating the realities of progress." "Mr. Gray," Sterling said, meeting Silas's gaze without flinching, "you are a large man. You can fight 3 men, maybe 10. Can you fight an institution? Can you fight the future if you stay in Red Willow? If you stay near that water, you will bring down a firestorm that makes Amos Hale's little blaze look like a candle. Leave. Take the woman and go. If you are gone, the tribe might negotiate. If you stay, you are a catalyst for war." Sterling picked up his briefcase and walked out. He did not slam the door. He didn't have to. The silence he left behind was loud enough. Silas looked at Ayanna. He saw the tension in her jaw. The lawyer was right about one thing: Silas was a lightning rod. His presence here, his relationship with Ayanna, gave the railroad a perfect excuse to paint the tribe as hostile and corrupted by outsiders. "I should go," Silas said quietly. "Do not start that," Ayanna snapped. "He is right. Ayanna, if I stay, they will use me to justify killing your people. They will say I'm inciting a rebellion." "If you go," Ayanna said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper, "you prove them right. You prove that a man like you cannot belong anywhere. You prove that we are too weak to hold on to what is ours. I am thinking of your safety. I am responsible for my own safety," she shouted, turning away from him. The rift between them was not caused by a lack of love, but by an excess of fear for each other. Silas was terrified that his love would be the death of her. Ayanna was terrified that his departure would be the death of his soul. The conflict followed them back to the temporary camp. With the town in chaos and the springs under threat, many of the tribe's families and several poor settlers who had been displaced by the fire had gathered in a sheltered arroyo, a dry creek bed about 5 miles from town. It was a place of uneasy truce, where poverty bridged the gap between cultures. But the social pressure was mounting. As Silas walked through the camp to fetch water, he felt the eyes on him. It was not just the white settlers staring. It was Ayanna's people too. An old warrior named Dakota stepped into Silas's path. He was short, withered like old leather, but his eyes were hard. "You take up much sun, tall one," Dakota said. "I try to walk softly," Silas replied respectfully. "You walk with our daughter." Dakota said, "Ayanna is a scout. She is the eyes of the people. When she looks at you, she does not see the path anymore. She sees only you. This is dangerous. You are from the town. You bring the town's sickness with you. The lawyers, the soldiers. If you care for her, you will leave. You are a heavy burden for a small bird to carry." Silas said nothing. He walked past the old man, but the words hooked into his heart. A heavy burden. That was all he had ever been. Too heavy for a horse, too heavy for a bed, too heavy for a wife, and now, too heavy for a tribe that was already carrying the weight of the world. He found Ayanna near the fire. She was cleaning her rifle, her movements jerky and angry. "Dakota spoke to you," she said without looking up. "He spoke the truth," Silas said. "I am a target. Ayanna, I am a 6'7" target painted on the side of your tent." "I do not care what Dakota thinks," Ayanna said. "He lives in the past." "He wants you to have a future," Silas said. Maybe I should keep riding west, to California. Once I am gone, the heat dies down. You can negotiate for the water without the violent giant standing next to you." Ayanna stood up, dropping the rifle. "Is that what you want to run after we stood in that church, after you told me you were done running?" "I want you to survive," Silas roared. It was the first time he had raised his voice at her. "I want to live," she shouted back. "Surviving is just breathing. Silas, living is choosing who you stand beside. If you leave now, you are not saving me. You are killing the part of me that believes in us." She stormed off into the darkness, leaving Silas alone with the fire and the crushing weight of his decision. The argument was unsettled when the sky decided to intervene. It began with a drop in pressure so sudden Silas's ears popped. The wind died instantly. The crickets stopped singing. The silence was absolute. Terrified. Then came the smell, the scent of wet dust and ozone. "Storm!" someone shouted from the edge of the camp. This was not a dust storm. This was a cloudburst. In the high desert, rain does not fall. It collapses. The clouds opened up over the mesas to the north, dumping millions of gallons of water onto the hard-baked earth that could not absorb it. The water had only one place to go down. Down into the canyons, down into the arroyos, down into the dry creek bed where 50 families were sleeping. Silas heard the roar before he saw the water. It sounded like a freight train made of gravel and liquid. "Flood!" Silas bellowed. His voice, usually something he tried to suppress, became a siren. "Get to the high ground, move now." He ran toward the tents. People were stumbling out, confused, half asleep. "Leave your things." Silas grabbed a woman who was trying to drag a trunk. "Move!" The wall of water hit the bend in the creek. It was 4 feet high. A churning slurry of mud, boulders, and uprooted mesquite trees. It smashed into the lower edge of the camp with the force of a battering ram. "The children!" Ayana's voice cut through the darkness. She was near the center of the creek bed, trying to herd a group of settler children toward the bank. But the water was rising too fast. The current undercut the bank, turning the escape route into a sheer wall of crumbling mud. Ayana and 3 children were trapped on a shrinking island of dry land in the middle of the torrent. The water was rising around them, dark and hungry. "Ayana!" Silas screamed. He saw her slip. The current grabbed her legs. She fought, plunging her knife into the mud to anchor herself, holding onto a terrified little girl with her other arm. Silas did not think. He did not weigh the pros and cons. He did not consult a lawyer. He ran to a fallen cottonwood tree that was being dragged by the current near the bank. He waded into the water. The cold was shocking, stealing the breath from his lungs. The current slammed into his legs, trying to knock him down. But Silas Gray was built like a pier piling. He planted his feet. He grabbed the heavy end of the tree trunk. With a roar that tore his throat, he lifted the log. It must have weighed 400 pounds, heavy with water. He pivoted, his muscles screaming, the stitches in his shoulder tearing open. He slammed the log down, bridging the gap between the bank and the island where Ayana was trapped. "Cross!" Silas yelled. "Cross now!" He held the log steady. The water piled up against his waist, pushing him, threatening to snap his spine. He became a living anchor. Ayana pushed the children onto the log. "Go crawl!" The children scrambled across the wet wood. Hands reached out from the bank to pull them to safety. "Ayana, you," Silas gritted out. His vision was blurring. The pain in his shoulder was blinding. Ayana stepped onto the log, but as she moved, a massive boulder rolled down the creek bed, smashing into the log. The wood splintered. Silas slipped. He went under. The darkness swallowed him. The mud filled his mouth. He felt himself being tumbled, dragged, battered against the rocks. He thought, so this is how it ends. Not with a bullet, but with mud. Then a hand grabbed his collar. It was not a strong hand. It was a desperate hand. Then another hand grabbed his belt. Then another. He broke the surface, gasping for air. He was being hauled up the muddy bank. It was not just Ayana. It was Dakota. It was the settler woman whose trunk he had left behind. It was Deputy Thorne, who had ridden out to warn them of the storm. They pulled the giant from the river. He lay in the mud, coughing up water, shivering violently. Ayana collapsed on top of him, weeping. She was shaking, her wet hair plastering to her face. "You idiot!" she sobbed, hitting his chest with her fist. "You giant, stupid idiot!" Silas caught her hand. He looked around. In the flashes of lightning, he saw the community. The lines between settler and tribe had been erased by the mud. They were just wet, shivering humans who had saved each other. Dakota looked down at Silas. The old warrior nodded slowly. "You are heavy, tall one," he said, "but you make a good bridge." The sun the next morning rose on a landscape scoured clean. The camp was gone, washed away, but the people remained. They gathered on the ridge. There was no talk of lawyers or water rights. There was only the shared reality of survival. They made their way toward the only structure standing, the town of Red Willow. When the bedraggled group reached the edge of town, they expected closed doors. They expected the "No Vagrants" signs. But as they passed the Golden Sage Inn, the door opened. Mrs. Gable, the innkeeper who had turned Silas away on his first night, stood on the porch. She looked at the shivering children, the wounded giant, and the exhausted warrior. "We have hot coffee," she called out. Her voice was unsure, but loud enough to be heard. "And blankets. The floor is hard, but it is dry. Anyone is welcome." She looked directly at Silas. "Anyone." It was a small thing, a cup of coffee, a dry floor, but it was the crack in the dam of prejudice. Silas walked into the inn. He had to duck his head, as always. But this time, no one laughed. The room fell silent, but it was a silence of respect. Thomas, the telegraph operator, was there. He walked up to Silas and handed him a piece of paper. "I sent a message this morning," Thomas said, "on my own dime, to the governor, to the newspapers in Santa Fe, to everyone." "What did it say?" Silas asked. "It said that the people of Red Willow, all the people saved each other from a flood," Thomas said. "It said that we are not hostile. It said that we are a community. And it said that if the railroad wants to steal our water, they will have to drown us all to get it." Silas looked at the paper. It was not a legal document. It was a declaration of existence. Later that afternoon, the rain had stopped. The air was crisp and clean. Silas and Ayanna stood at the crossroads at the edge of town. To the east lay the railroad. To the west lay California and anonymity. "The lawyer will be back," Silas said. "The railroad does not give up." "Neither do we," Ayanna said. She touched the fresh bandage on his shoulder. "Are you still leaving?" Silas looked at the town. He saw Evelyn Kitt boarding the stagecoach, leaving her failures behind. He saw Deputy Thorne helping Dakota fix a wagon wheel. He saw the spot where he had slept in the dirt because he was too tall to fit in a bed. "No," Silas said. "But you cannot stay in town," Ayanna said. "They respect you today, but tomorrow they will remember you are different. You will never truly fit in their boxes." "I am done trying to fit in boxes," Silas said. He turned and pointed toward the north, to a patch of high ground near the springs, where the cottonwood trees grew tall and strong trees that did not apologize for their height. "I am not going to ask the town for a home," Silas said. "And I am not going to ask the railroad for permission. We are going to build something new, out there, a place where the door frames are 7 feet high, a place where anyone who is tired white, red, or mixed can stop." "A trading post?" Ayanna asked. "A sanctuary," Silas corrected. "We will control the water." "Ayanna, not by fighting for it, but by sharing it. We will make ourselves the bridge." "Just like in the river." Ayanna smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had finally found a partner who could match her stride. "A bridge," she repeated. "I like that. But we will need a lot of lumber." "I can carry it," Silas said. He took her hand. They did not ride into the sunset. They rode toward the midday sun, bright and unforgiving, ready to build a life on the hard, red earth. They were not falling anymore. The falling action was over. They had landed, and they had landed on their feet. The sun over the New Mexico territory was no longer a harsh judge. It was simply a witness. 6 months had passed since the floodwaters had receded, scouring the canyons clean, and in that time, the landscape had changed. It was not a change written on maps, but a change carved into the earth by human hands. 5 miles north of Red Willow, where the ancient spring bubbled up from the red rock, a structure now stood. It was not a tent, nor a cave, nor a hiding place. It was a building of solid pine and river stone, anchoring the desert floor like a fortress. Silas Gray stood on the porch of the trading post. He held a hammer in his hand, its handle polished smooth by weeks of labor. He looked up at the doorframe he had just finished. It was 7 feet and 2 inches high, for the first time in his life. Silas Gray could walk through a door without bowing his head. He took a deep breath, smelling the scent of sawdust and wet sage. He had built this place beam by beam. He and Ayanna had hauled the timber from the high ridges. They had mixed the mortar with the water they had fought to protect. They called it the Crossing. It was not a hotel, and it was not a charity. It was a station, a place where the world of the tribe and the world of the town intersected. A wagon rattled up the dusty track. The driver was a stranger. a freighter hauling supplies to the railroad camp further east. He pulled on the reins, eyeing the massive man on the porch with suspicion. "Water," the driver called out, his hand drifting near the shotgun on his seat. "Bucket is by the trough," Silas said. His voice was calm, a low rumble that carried easily in the still air. "Water is free. Coffee costs a nickel. If you want grain for the mules, that is 50 cents. The driver hesitated. He looked at Silas's size, at the scars visible on his forearms. Then he looked at the sign hanging above the door, burned into a piece of driftwood. "No arms, no hate, just water." The driver nodded slowly. He climbed down, leaving the shotgun on the seat. "Fair enough," he said. This was the law of the crossing. It was a simple code, unwritten but enforced by the sheer presence of the two people who ran it. You could be a soldier, a scout, a thief, or a priest. If you were thirsty, you drank. If you were tired, you slept. But if you brought the poison of prejudice into the house, you were thrown out. And as the few men who had tried it discovered, being thrown out by Silas Gray was an experience akin to being launched from a catapult. Inside the post, Ayanna was negotiating with a group of women from the tribe. They had brought woven baskets and silverwork. Ayanna did not stand behind a counter like a clerk. She sat on the edge of a heavy oak table, her moccasins swinging slightly. She looked up as Silas entered. The connection between them was instant, a silent thread of awareness that tied them together even across a crowded room. She was not wearing the silk dresses of a town wife. She wore her buckskins, clean and mended, with a red scarf tied around her neck. She looked fierce, competent, and entirely free. "The freighter needs grain," Silas said. "We have 2 sacks left in the back." Ayanna replied, "I will trade him for sugar if he has it. We are low." She hopped off the table. As she passed Silas, her hand brushed against his waist. It was a fleeting touch, barely visible, but it carried more weight than a wedding ring. It was an acknowledgement. "I am here. You are here. We are standing." The town of Red Willow was changing too. It was a slow, grinding change, like a wheel turning in deep mud. But it was turning. The railroad had arrived 2 months ago. The iron tracks now cut across the horizon, bringing noise and smoke and strangers. But the water war had ended. The publicity from Thomas's telegrams and the subsequent investigation by the territorial marshal had forced the railroad company to sign a formal treaty. They could buy water, but they could not own the spring. It was an imperfect peace. There were still men in town who spat when they heard Silas's name. There were still shops where Ayanna would not be served. But there were others. Mrs. Gable, the innkeeper, now bought all her firewood from the crossing. Deputy Thorne rode out once a week, ostensibly to check for outlaws, but mostly to drink coffee and sit in the shade of the porch, escaping the noise of the boomtown. And then there was Evelyn Kitt. Silas stepped back out onto the porch as a familiar black buggy approached. The horse was old, the paint on the carriage peeling. Evelyn was driving it herself. She pulled the buggy to a halt. She looked older than her years. The scandal of the church meeting, the foreclosure of her home, and the revelation of her debts had stripped away her social standing. She was no longer the prize of Red Willow. She was a seamstress now, living in a rented room behind the bakery, working 10 hours a day to pay back what she owed. Silas walked down the steps. "Evelyn, Silas," she said. She did not look away. She did not flinch at his height. The fear that had defined their first meeting was gone, burned away by the fire of consequence. "I am leaving today," Evelyn said. "I have a ticket on the afternoon train to Denver. My sister has found me a position in a dress shop." "I wish you luck," Silas said sincerely, genuinely. "I do not need luck," Evelyn said with a faint, sad smile. "I need to clear my ledger." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a thick envelope. She handed it to him. "What is this?" Silas asked. "It is the deed," she said. "Not the fraudulent one Amos tried to make me sign. The real one. The one my father left me." Silas frowned. "Evelyn, this land, the plot that controls the access road to the spring, as it is valuable. The railroad would pay you thousands. The railroad offered me $5,000 yesterday, Evelyn admitted. I told them to go to hell. She smoothed her skirts. I signed it over to you, Silas, and to Ayanna. It is filed with the county clerk. It is yours, the road, the access, all of it. Why? Silas asked. You could start over with that money. You could have the life you wanted. I tried to buy a life once, Evelyn said, looking at the trading post, at the solid timber and the open door. I tried to buy a husband to fit a picture in my head. I hurt a good man because I was too blind to see past his shadow. If I took that money now, I would just be selling my conscience again. She picked up the reins. Consider it a dowry for a marriage that never happened, or payment for a lesson I desperately needed to learn. You built a home here, Silas, a real one. I am just making sure no one can ever take it away from you. Thank you, Silas said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Goodbye, Silas Gray. Evelyn said, You are too tall for my house, but I think you are just the right size for the world. She snapped the reins, and the buggy rolled away, disappearing into the dust of the road. Silas stood there, holding the envelope. He felt a strange lightness in his chest. The circle was closed. The woman who had brought him here as a commodity had just freed him as a man. Ayanna stepped out onto the porch. She had watched the exchange from the doorway. She gave us the road, Silas said, handing her the envelope. Ayanna looked at the papers. She nodded slowly. She finally found her spine. It took her losing everything to find it, but she found it. We own it, Silas said. He looked around at the red earth, the shimmering heat, the distant purple mesas. We really own it. No landlord, no bank, no Amos Hale. We own the land, Ayanna corrected him gently. But the land owns us too. Do not forget that. She walked down the steps and headed toward the spring. Silas followed her. They walked past the busy trading post, past the horses tied at the rail, down to the cool, green sanctuary of the water. Silas sat on the flat rock where they had first touched. The water bubbled cheerfully, indifferent to the dramas of men. I used to dream of a house, Silas said, picking up a smooth stone. A white house with a picket fence. I thought if I had that, I would be normal. I would be safe. And now, Ayanna asked, leaning against a willow tree. Now I know that a fence just keeps you in. Silas said. He tossed the stone into the water. I do not want to be normal. Ayanna, I want to be useful. I want it to be true. He looked at her. And I want to be yours. Ayanna pushed off the tree and walked over to him. She placed her hands on his shoulders. Even now, she had to reach up, and he had to lean down, but the distance between them was gone. You are mine, she said fiercely, fierce and low. But not because I bought a ticket, and not because I need a shield. You are mine because when the flood came, you became a bridge. She kissed him. It was not the desperate kiss of the night in the canyon, nor the adrenaline-fueled kiss of survival. It was a steady kiss, a kiss that tasted of coffee and promise. I am not going to tame you. Ayanna, Silas whispered against her forehead. I know people talk. They say I should make you wear a dress. They say a wife should not carry a rifle. Let them talk, Ayanna said, pulling back to look him in the eyes. If I stopped carrying a rifle, who would watch your back when you are being stubborn? Silas laughed. It was a deep, rusty sound that rumbled in his chest. I suppose you are right. I am always right, she said, her eyes dancing. That is why you love me. That, Silas agreed. And the fact that you are the only person in the territory who does not ask me how the weather is up here. The sun began to set, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and violet. From the east, the mournful wail of a train whistle drifted across the desert. The Union Pacific was running on time. The machine of progress was grinding forward, eating up the miles, changing the frontier forever. The telegraph wires hummed with news of stock prices and wars and politics. But here, in the spring, the water flowed clear. Silas Gray stood up. He stretched his back, his shadow elongating across the ground until it touched the canyon wall. He was a giant, He would always be a giant. He would always be stared at. But he was no longer a curiosity. He was a landmark. He looked at the trading post. Smoke was curling from the chimney. He could hear the laughter of the freighter and the murmur of the women trading baskets. He heard the sound of a hammer striking a nail, someone fixing a loose board on the corral. It was not a perfect world. There was still drought. There were still rattlesnakes. There were still men with hate in their hearts who would come down that road. But as Silas put his arm around Ayanna's shoulders, and she leaned her weight against his side, he knew the truth. Home was not a place you bought. Home was not a place you were given. Home was a place you built, board by board, act by act, standing tall when everyone else told you to kneel. "Come on," Silas said. "The coffee is getting cold, and we have guests." "Let us go," Ayanna said. They walked back up the path together, two silhouettes against the dying light, one tall and solid as a mountain, the other sharp and swift as the wind. They walked toward the open door of the house they had built, ready to welcome whatever the night brought. The sound of the hammer echoed one last time, a heartbeat in the silence of the desert. Then there was laughter. And then there was peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Silas and Ayanna. It has been a journey through the dust and the heat of the 1800s, and I hope their fight for dignity and love resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in a busy city? Or out in the quiet country like Red Willow? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Do not forget to like this video and smash that hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these legends alive. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open. Goodbye.